Welcome everyone, it's Romero17 and today I'm going to be breaking down the block system on UFC 4. Now there's been a lot of confusion. I feel like a lot of people don't really understand how this works. So up there with the overlay, I'm showing you that there is a short-term block and a long-term block. Now what does that mean? Now if you notice when you throw strikes with your stamina, right? There's a period where your stamina is going to recover, and that moment where it's low, that's the short-term stamina, and the same thing applies to the block. Your long-term block is the overall length of your bar, and there are certain strikes that affect the bar or the overall length more than others. So jabs and crosses, they do the least amount of long-term block damage. Obviously, the short-term damage is where it's mainly focused on, right? And hooks and uppers, they do slightly more long-term block damage. There's still not as much as, like, say, an overhand or a spinning head kick or a head kick in general on the block. So I'm going to show you this. I'm throwing a jab at perfect range. As you can see, I'm getting the max value damage from Dustin Poirier's jab and his cross, right? So here's the thing about blocking. It doesn't require stamina to block stationary. You're going to see how much damage gets taken away when I get Khabib to block. He has about a 95 blocking stat. Right now, while his block is at about 70% out, even after recovering, right? I'm doing zero damage at the strength of his block. Now when I follow up with a second strike and I attack when his short-term block is a little bit lower, it bleeds through a little bit more and it does a little bit more bleed through damage. But as you can see right there, right, I'm not getting the the full damage potential on my strikes at all through the block. Now if you get somebody's short-term block low, you get this animation where the front block is overcommitted. As you notice though, the bleed through is still low. I'm doing one damage, two, mostly 3 damage, because the block is now focused on perfectly defending against the barrage of straight punches. And as you can notice here, my stamina is fine. Nothing's happened to me. There's going to be some bleed through damage, but especially if you're a very competent player, you're going to be able to make the necessary reads and counter off of the block. So as you can see right here, I'm just going to keep going with a barrage of strikes. See this? But as you can see, the lower my short-term block goes, there is more bleed through damage. So you can see that it increases, right? It went from increments of 1 to 2 to now it's going to 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 at the lower that my short-term block is. But despite this barrage of punches that I've just had Khabib take, his long-term block really didn't take that much. But again, this is also supposed to incentivize you to use your other forms of defense, whether it's going to be slipping or lunging away from your opponent. You can't just rely on the block the entire time. Now, back to round strikes, they do a little bit more damage than jabs and crosses if you're at the proper range. But if you force the opponent to overcommit to blocks, to hooking strikes to block those strikes, it's going to reduce the amount of damage that block can do. But you notice it does a little bit more damage on the long-term block. The good thing is here, you can still use head movement if your block is overcommitted. And the special thing about the overcommitted side block is that you're still going to be able to block counter off of that. And I will show you that a little bit later. I showed it in my counter striking video and we'll get to that soon. So if you're an offensive individual and you're trying to work on your opponent's block, if you force the front block to come out, you're going to look to try to get a round strike in to get the most bleed through damage possible, right? I don't want this video to focus too much on like countering like specific block breaking combinations, not just yet. I'll get on that another time. But you can notice that right here, this is a barrage of strikes that Khabib is eating, and it's taking a long time before I can even get to the point of dropping him. But if you're an offensive individual, right, if you're a very offensive pressure-based player on UFC 4, recognizing and limiting your opponent's options to where they're going to go and knowing how their block is going to react after you've shortened the relative lifespan of it is going to upgrade your striking by a milestone. See right here, forcing the side block over commit and slipping through right up the middle. So with the block counter, if somebody lands a hook on the lead side of your block, you can input the lead hook and it will fire off a really fast block counter. And you can still do this if your side block is overcommitted and somebody tries to land a round strike on it. So keep that in mind. You can check that in the counter striking video that I've uploaded a few days ago. So going to like heavier strikes, say block body kicks. One thing that I noticed labbing it is that the block body kicks, they don't do that much short-term block damage, but they do over time. They do a lot more long-term block damage. I think I like to liken it to like maybe deadening the arm after a certain amount of time. You know, you're just taking those punches on the forearm over and over and over again. But for what it's worth, like Gaethje, his short-term block is not going down at all. However, in comparison to like the barrage of strikes I had been throwing with the punches, his long-term block is going down within all these body kicks. And I threw probably about way above 50, 60, 70 punches, and Gaethje's block was not getting this low this quickly. So not every strike is the same when it comes to the block. The block handles every strike a little bit differently than the other. Heavier strikes, they're generally more geared towards long-term damage on the block. So if you're lunging into a strike, right, there's something called block stun. If you get block stunned, you see this little staggering animation. So I'm holding L2 and R2 as I'm major lunging into the kick, and you're noticing a little stagger animation. I can also fall down into the mat if I move into a strike. This will also happen against body hooks as well. But as you can see here, keep this in mind. If you block, you're still relatively safe. You're not taking any damage at all if you lunge into a strike and you're holding block. So when it comes to head kicks now, this is probably like the riskier thing. There's a heavy bleed through. If you're stationary, it doesn't really do that much short term. But right here, I'm lunging into the head kick. I'm lunging into the head kick while holding block. And it's still taking it quite amount of time for it to do any crazy damage, but the long-term damage it's doing on my block is insane. And this is where you have to really play it careful when you're lunging around and not blocking. Gaethje's signature block, it actually nullifies the hooks to like 0 damage, which is crazy, because before in UFC 3, it would actually do some bleed through. I guess I have to get to the developers on that. But it takes bleed through from head kicks, right? It's still going to take bleed through from head kicks. You're susceptible to body strikes and leg strikes. And any straight strike that comes up the middle, any jabs, crosses, or front kicks, you're still going to be a victim of those strikes if you're using the Gaethje signature block. But this is a good little understanding how this block works is going to help you mix it up between the regular block and Gaethje's signature block. So have some fun, try it out in practice mode, and you'll see how far it can get you defensively and counter offensively. Next up is going to be the ground and pound. So the ground and pound, obviously your overall strike damage is going to be based on the move level. It's kind of hard to get the AI to kind of comply with me trying to show off the ground and pound. But basically, when a ground and pound, it does low long-term block damage. It does a really heavy amount of short-term block damage, and if it actually does land on your head, it's actually long-term focused when it comes to the damage to the head. But yeah, so with the ground and pound, your only concern is going to be the short-term block. So I usually recommend that players, they block one, they slip the other, block the next strike, and then try to either frame against the hook or slip against the jab or cross when it comes to the ground and pound. Before all the patches, the ground and pound was extremely broken, where it would just be devastating to the long-term block and the short-term block. So I'm pretty happy that they managed to balance it out so it's not extremely busted. If you keep posturing up and you keep getting reversed or flipped over, it's really taxing on your stamina. So good little balances that they made overall to the ground and pound in UFC 4. So now the final thing is going to be on blocking while you're moving. This one is probably has the most repercussions. If you are blocking and you move into a strike, it does a lot of short-term damage, and it does a lot of long-term block damage, similar to like what a head kick does. So I'm not even going to really try to evade some of the strike. It's just going to be hook, hook, hook. I'm just going to move my head, and you're going to see how fast my short-term block goes down. Notice that my stamina, though, despite that I'm moving my head all over the place, my stamina is fine. My stamina is perfectly fine. It's barely doing anything to my short-term, to my long-term stamina, excuse me. But the damage is something that I have to be concerned about. And even if my block gets shredded immensely, I'll get to that point where I'll show you that I'm still going to be able to move my head after getting my head out, my block health reduced to absolute shreds here by Colby Covington. So you can hear, I can still move my head. Even if I get hit by one strike that completely shuts down my short-term block, I'm still going to be able to move my head. But this is like the inherent risk when it comes to blocking and moving your head. So that's pretty much it when it comes to understanding how the block system works. This is just basic fundamentals, basic things that you just gotta understand when it comes to striking in this game. So recap, overall your long-term block health is what truly determines the barrage of strikes you can take, but knowing what does what to your short-term block health is important too, so you know when to use head movement and when to evade. So it's imperative that you take other measures of defense when you're playing UFC 4, and if you really want to have a good time playing this game. This is Romero17. This is breaking down the block system on UFC 4. I'm out of here.